The papers came across the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. My father had already poured my coffee. The toast was cut diagonally the way he liked it. My mother was wiping the counter. My brother sat at the end of the table in his flannel shirt, reading the Des Moines Register. My father slid the papers toward me. "Sign this. Stop acting entitled." My brother didn't look up. "You don't own anything." My mother kept wiping. I didn't argue. I put on my coat. I drove 23 miles to the county recorder's office in Waterloo. The businessman who'd offered to buy our farm was already there. He handed me a file. "You need to see this. My name is Wanda Caudill. I am 31 years old." And what he said next told me that my mother had been signing my grandfather's name for 13 days. He had been dead for 3 years. Before I take you back, if this is already hitting you, take 1 second to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I read every single one. I'm Wanda. This is the story of the morning my parents tried to sell my grandfather's farm with a signature he hadn't been alive to write. Let me take you back 22 years. To understand what happened that morning, you have to understand the farm. 320 acres of corn and soy in Black Hawk County, Iowa. 15 miles north of Cedar Falls, where the gravel road bends to follow the creek. The same parcel my great-great-grandfather staked in 1887. The same farmhouse, mostly. The kitchen has been remodeled twice, and the porch rebuilt 3 times, but the bones are still there. The bones are 138 years old. I learned to count by counting calves with my grandfather, Bernard Caudill, 81 years old when he died. Quiet hands, careful eyes. When I was 4, he'd lift me onto the gate of the pen, and we'd count the heifers as they passed. 1, 2, 3. He never skipped numbers, and he never let me skip numbers. "Take your time, sweet pea," he'd say. "The world is full of people in a hurry. You don't have to be one of them. I am a certified public accountant, Holcomb and Reeve LLP in Cedar Falls, agricultural specialty. I do tax returns for grain elevators and cattle operations. I read balance sheets the way some people read novels. I notice when a decimal point is in the wrong place. I notice when a margin doesn't sit right on the page. I'm the kid who came home every weekend. Saturday mornings, I'd drive the 25 minutes from my apartment to the farm, and I'd sit at the kitchen table with my grandfather's old ledger and the new QuickBooks file, reconciling the two. He'd watch me work. He'd pour coffee. He'd say almost nothing. We didn't have to talk. The numbers talked. After he died, I kept driving out. Every weekend. The ledger was closed, but the operating account was still there, and somebody had to handle the books. I told myself I was just being useful. I told myself I owed it to him. I told myself a lot of things. The kitchen is the same kitchen I grew up in. Chipped Formica countertop with the half-moon scorch mark where my brother, aged 12, set down a hot skillet. The salt cellar by the window. Blue ceramic. My grandmother bought it at the church bazaar in 1986. 4 chairs at the table. 1 for my father, 1 for my mother, 1 for my brother, 1 for me. The arrangement has not changed in 31 years. My father, Walter, sat in the same chair every meal. 64 years old. 40 years at Mid-American Energy as a lineman before he retired. Tired voice, tired posture. The kind of man who considered himself realistic, which is the word men in our family used to describe themselves when they were being unkind. My mother, Diane, was usually at the counter when conversations like this started. 62. Quiet. Part-time bookkeeper at our Lutheran church until last year. She kept her opinions in the back of her mouth and let them out slowly, one at a time, always after pretending to listen. My brother, Travis, was 35. Sales manager at the Pella window dealer in Waterloo. He drove a leased Tahoe and wore a thumb ring he'd bought at a Branson resort. He had a wife named Caroline and a son named Ethan who was 6. He liked to be liked. He had a way of laughing that always sounded a beat too late. That Sunday in early November, I drove out the way I always did. The cornfields were stripped down to stubble. The sky was that flat white you get in Iowa before the first snow. I parked beside the chicken coop my grandfather had built in 1991. I walked up the porch steps. I opened the back door without knocking. We never knocked. My father had already poured my coffee. The toast was cut diagonally on the blue plate. My mother was wiping the counter, even though the counter was clean. My brother was at the table in his flannel shirt reading the paper. The salt cellar was not where it usually sat. It was 3 inches to the left of where my grandmother had put it in 1986. I noticed. My father smiled the smile of a man who had already decided what was going to happen next and slid a stack of papers across the table. The first time I heard the word entitled applied to me, I was 9 years old. It was the summer of 2003. My brother had been given a new BMX bike for his 13th birthday, the kind with pegs on the back wheels and a chrome handlebar. I had inherited my cousin's pink Huffy with the rusted chain. One Saturday, Travis decided he wanted to try the rusted Huffy. He took it down to the gravel road and rode it into a culvert at full speed. The frame bent. The handlebar snapped at the weld. He came back to the house holding the broken handlebar. Wanda left her bike on the driveway. I tripped over it. I had not left it on the driveway. The driveway was visible from the kitchen window. The bike had been leaned against the side of the chicken coop, where I always left it. My father looked at me. "You can't be leaving your things where people walk," I said. "It wasn't on the driveway." My mother turned from the sink, smiled the soft smile, and said, "Don't act so entitled, Wanda. Things happen to bikes. We can't all afford to be precious." I was 9. I didn't know what entitled meant. I went upstairs and looked it up in the Webster's my grandmother kept on the bookshelf next to the church directory. Believing oneself to be inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. I closed the dictionary. I sat on the bed. I tried to figure out what privilege I had asked for. I couldn't think of one. That was the first time. I started counting after that. When I was 16, my brother, 20 at the time, crashed my used Ford Ranger into a fence post on County Road Fee 14. He was drunk. He had taken the keys without asking. The repair bill came to $3,200. My parents told me the insurance wouldn't cover it because of some technicality with the named driver. They told me I'd have to pay for the repairs out of my FFA scholarship money, the money I'd been saving since I was 12, raising and selling 4 heifers for the Black Hawk County Fair. I did the math at the kitchen table while my mother made dinner. $3,200 was every penny I had saved over 4 years. "It's not fair to make Travis pay," she said, slicing a tomato. "He's just starting out. You haven't even left for college yet. You have time to earn more." I wrote the check. My father witnessed it. My brother didn't say thank you. He said, "Don't make a thing of it, Wanda. You're not the only one in this family." I noted the word that wasn't there. Sorry. By the time I left for Iowa State, I had counted the word entitled applied to me 11 times. 11 separate occasions. 11 separate failures of fairness. I have a notebook in my closet that lists each one. I started keeping it in 8th grade. I kept it because I had begun to suspect that I was the only one who would remember. In April of 2021, my parents handed me an envelope at Easter dinner. Inside was a check for $22,000, payable to me. My mother had written a note in her looping cursive. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Graduate school. Earn the credentials you deserve. Love, Mom and Dad." I cried. I am not a crier. I cried because I had spent 31 years waiting for a sentence that began with proud. I hugged my mother. I hugged my father. I thanked them. I thanked them for the next 3 Easters. I thanked them every time the subject of graduate school came up. I told my coworkers at Holcomb and Reeve about my parents' generosity. I told them about the note. I used the money to pay for my master's program at Iowa State. 2 years, weekends, and summers. I drove out to the farm every Saturday morning during that program with a thank you in my mouth, the way you carry a sweet you're not allowed to chew. My grandfather watched me. Bernard sat across the kitchen table from me one Saturday in the summer of 2022 while I was finishing my final semester. He didn't say much. He poured coffee. He watched me reconcile the operating account. And then, quietly, in the way he said things, he said, "Sweet pea, you don't have to thank them for everything." I looked up. He didn't look up. He was reading the back of the seed catalog. I said, "What do you mean?" He took a sip of coffee. "Some gifts aren't gifts. Some are bills you didn't know you were paying." I thought he was being a stubborn old man. I thought he resented my parents for some old quarrel I didn't know about. I dismissed him. I went back to my QuickBooks file. I added a memo to the entry. Tuition reimbursement Q2, gift from M&D. 2 months later, the doctor at Mayo Clinic told him he had 8 weeks. He had 10. Has anyone else grown up in a family where the word entitled was their only inheritance? Drop one word in the comments. Whatever first comes to mind. I want to know I'm not the only one. Pancreatic cancer is fast. That's the line oncologists use when they want you to understand that what you are about to lose, you are about to lose, without time to prepare. I drove from Cedar Falls to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester 3 times a week for the last 6 weeks of his life. The drive is 2.5 hours each way. I learned every exit on I-380 and I-90. I learned which gas stations had clean bathrooms and which ones had decent coffee. I learned the rhythm of his pain medication schedule, which hours he was lucid, which hours he was somewhere else. Bernard was a quiet man even when healthy. He became quieter dying. The room smelled of antiseptic and the lavender lotion my grandmother used to wear, which my aunt had brought from home. There was a window that looked out on a parking garage. He liked to watch the cars come and go. He told me once that he liked seeing how many people were still busy with living. I sat in the chair beside his bed. I held his hand the way I'd held it when I was 4. His hand had thinned. The veins stood out. I'd memorized the shape of those veins the way other women memorize their grandmother's wedding ring. My parents came once. My brother did not come. The last real conversation Bernard and I had was on a Tuesday in late October of 2022. He'd been on a higher dose since the morning, and his voice was thin, but his eyes were clear. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at me. He said, "Sweet pea." I said, "I'm here, Grandpa." He said, "I want you to remember something. Are you listening?" I said, "Yes." He said, "If anything happens that you can't make sense of, anything, you call Owen Whitaker. Whitaker and Associates. Waterloo. Do you understand me?" I said, "I understand." He said, "Write it down right now. Where you'll see it." I took the checkbook out of my purse. I opened the cover. I wrote in pencil on the inside flap, Owen Whitaker. Whitaker and Associates. Waterloo. He watched me write it. Then he closed his eyes. He said, "Good. Now read me the seed catalog." I read him the seed catalog. He died 10 days later. We buried him next to my grandmother in the Lutheran Cemetery on County Road 514. The same road my brother had crashed my truck on. The same road I'd driven down every Saturday morning of my adult life. The wind that day was sharp, and the corn was already harvested, and the sky was that flat white I will never not associate with Iowa funerals. My mother gave the eulogy. She spoke about her father in a careful, level voice. She mentioned my father, Walter, his only son-in-law, who loved him like a brother. She mentioned Travis, Bernard's only grandson, the one who carried the name forward. She did not say my name. Not once. She said the grandchildren once, briefly, and moved on. I stood in the second row in my black coat and counted the omissions. 3. 3 places where my name should have gone. I noted them the way I'd note a discrepancy in a client's tax filing. I did not cry at the funeral. I cried in the car on the way back to Cedar Falls, alone, with the heat cranked all the way up. The year after he died, I kept driving out. Every Saturday. The kitchen still smelled like his pipe tobacco for the first 6 months, and then, slowly, it stopped. I told myself I was being useful. I told myself the operating account still needed reconciling. I told myself my parents couldn't manage the bookkeeping alone, even though my mother had done church accounts for 2 decades. I told myself a lot of things that, looking back, were not the things I should have been telling myself. I noticed small irregularities in the account. I noticed payments that didn't match invoices. I noticed checks written to vendors whose names I didn't recognize. I noticed amounts that were odd. $2,200 for equipment repair when the equipment hadn't been repaired. I logged each one in QuickBooks. I gave my father the benefit of the doubt. He was grieving, I told myself. He was tired. He was the head of the household now, in the way Walter had always wanted to be, and he was getting things wrong. I did not put it together. I did not want to put it together. He had been building something I couldn't see yet. I just didn't know who he was. The first time I met Owen Whitaker, I didn't know I was meeting him. It was the first Saturday of September 2025. I'd driven out at my usual time. 8 in the morning, coffee from the gas station outside Cedar Falls in my hand. When I pulled up to the house, there was a Buick I didn't recognize parked next to my father's truck. A man in a tweed sport coat was standing on the porch with my father. They were shaking hands the way men shake hands when they've already agreed on something. I climbed out of my Subaru. My father turned and waved me up. "Wanda, come meet Mr. Whitaker. He's interested in the place." The name didn't register. Of course it didn't. I had written it in pencil on the inside cover of a checkbook 3 years earlier, and I had not looked at that checkbook since. He turned toward me. Mid-50s, 60 maybe, silver-gray hair cut short, eyes that took their time. He held out his hand. "Owen Whitaker. Pleased to meet you, Wanda." I shook his hand. "Good to meet you, Mr. Whitaker," he said. "Please, Owen." We went into the kitchen. My mother was at the counter making coffee. She poured 4 cups. She did not ask Owen how he took his. She set the cream beside his cup. He waved it off and reached for the salt cellar with one hand while reaching for the sugar with the other. For the sugar, not the cream. He didn't look at the salt cellar. He just moved it to the left, 3 inches, into the place where my grandmother had kept it from 1986 until she died in 2020. My mother had been moving it back. I'd noticed and not noticed, the way you notice and don't notice things in a house you've stopped really seeing. Owen put the cellar where my grandmother had put it. He sipped his coffee. He said, "Good coffee, Diane, thank you." She said, "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker." She didn't ask how he knew her first name. She had not introduced herself. Neither had my father. I sat down at my chair. I sipped my coffee. I started counting. Owen and my father spoke about the land. 320 acres, acreage maps from the county GIS site, soil survey numbers, water tile maintenance records. Owen knew all the right things to ask. He sounded like a serious buyer. He looked at the photograph on the wall above the table. Bernard, age 60, standing in front of the combine in 2001. He looked at it for a beat too long. He said, "Strong-looking man." My father said, "He was." Owen said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He looked at me when he said it. Not at my father. At me. The screen door slammed. Travis came in. He hadn't been expected. He worked Saturday mornings until 11. He stood at the threshold with his hands in his pockets. He saw Owen. He saw the coffee. He saw the 4 cups. He said, "Oh, sorry, I'll come back." My father said, "No, son, sit down. This is the gentleman I told you about." Travis sat. He drummed his thumb on his knee. I knew that drum. I'd known it since I was 6. He drummed his thumb on his knee whenever he was lying or whenever he was about to. He drummed his thumb on his knee at the dinner table the night before he crashed my truck. He drummed his thumb on his knee at the funeral. He shook Owen's hand. "Travis, Walter's son." Owen said, "Pleased to meet you, Travis." The 4 of us sat at the table that had been built for the 4 of us by my great-grandfather in 1953. I sat in my chair, my father in his. My mother now at the counter, back to us, wiping. My brother in his. Owen sat in my grandfather's chair. Nobody had offered it to him. Nobody had asked him to sit somewhere else. We talked about the price. My father quoted $8,000 an acre. Owen nodded once. He said, "Reasonable. I'll be in touch about an offer letter by Friday." He stood up. He picked up his hat. A brown felt fedora, the kind men still wore in the 1970s and almost no one wears anymore. He said his goodbyes. I walked him out. I don't know why. Something in me wanted to see him to his car. We walked across the gravel. He didn't speak. At his Buick, he turned to me. He said, "I knew your grandfather. He was a careful man." He opened his car door. He paused. "He was very fond of you. I thought you should know that." He got into his car. He closed the door. He drove out down the gravel road, and the dust rose up behind him. And I stood there counting the seconds until the dust settled. I drove back to Cedar Falls thinking about cream. He had reached for sugar, not cream, the way a man who had eaten breakfast in that kitchen before would have known to do. The cream pitcher had never been on the table. He had known. It took me 3 weeks to start looking properly. I would like to say that I sat down with the bank statements the day after Owen left, but I didn't. I told myself the cream was a coincidence. I told myself the salt cellar was a coincidence. I told myself 1,000 small things were coincidences. This is what people do when they don't want to know. The last Saturday of September, I drove out and let myself into the empty house. My parents had gone to my nephew's soccer game. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up the operating account statements going back 5 years. I downloaded all of them. I drove home with the file on my hard drive. That night, I sat in my apartment in Cedar Falls and I opened the file. I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink. I started counting. The operating account had been quiet from 2020 through the early part of 2023. The numbers behaved, inputs from grain checks, outputs for seed, fertilizer, fuel, equipment, property tax, utilities. The way an Iowa farm account behaves when an Iowa farmer is running an Iowa farm. In March of 2023, 4 months after my grandfather died, the pattern changed. A check for $2,100 written to Iowa Equipment Repair. There was no Iowa Equipment Repair invoice in my QuickBooks file. There was no entry for an equipment repair that month. In April, a check for $3,200 to Caudill Seed Company. There was no Caudill Seed Company on the seed order ledger. My grandfather had bought his seed from Pioneer for 40 years. In May, $2,500 to Black Hawk Vet. Real vendor name. No corresponding vet visit. By the time I was 3 months into the spreadsheet, my fingers had gone cold. I built a master ledger, 2 columns, real expenses on the left, checks written from the operating account on the right. I cross-referenced every line. I cross-referenced every invoice. I cross-referenced every vendor against the actual vendor list my grandfather had kept in a green notebook in the desk drawer for 40 years. 32 months of statements. March 2023 through October 2025. Every month between $2,000 and $5,000 unaccounted for. Every month. The total, when I added it up, came to $182,000. I sat at my kitchen counter at 2 in the morning. I had not eaten dinner. The wine glass was still full. The total on my screen was $182,000. I poured myself a second glass and didn't drink that one either. The next morning, I drove to the bank in Waterloo where the farm account was held. I had signing authority. My grandfather had put me on the account in 2018 when he first started slowing down. I'd never used it. I'd never thought about it. I asked the teller for the canceled checks for the last 3 years. She printed them. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and went through them, page by page. I found 3 I was not looking for. Check number 2089, dated June 17th, 2023, made out to Wanda Caudle for $4,500. Memo line, in my mother's handwriting. Birthday gift, Wanda. With love, Mom and Dad. Check number 1976, dated December 20th, 2022, made out to Wanda Caudle for $8,200. Memo. Christmas, Wanda. With love, Mom and Dad. Check number 1604, dated April 2nd, 2021, made out to Wanda Caudle for $22,000. Memo. Graduate School, Wanda. We are so proud. All 3 from the operating account. I sat in my car. I put the canceled checks down on the passenger seat. I looked at them the way you look at something you've already understood but can't yet feel. Every gift my parents had given me in the 4 years after my grandfather died had been my own money. I had thanked them. I had hugged them. I had told my coworkers. I had carried the gratitude around in my mouth like a sweet I wasn't allowed to chew. I sat in the bank parking lot for 40 minutes. A woman with a stroller walked past my car twice. A man in coveralls came out with a deposit slip and got into a pickup truck and drove away. The sun moved a little higher. I sat there and I let myself understand it. And then, sitting there, the sentence came back to me. If anything happens that you can't make sense of, anything, you call Owen Whitaker. I had said I understand to him on his deathbed. I had not understood. I drove home. I went straight to my bedroom. I opened the closet. I pulled out the cardboard box of old checkbooks from the bottom shelf. I dug through them until I found it. The brown leather checkbook I'd carried through college. The one I'd switched out of in 2019. I opened the inside flap. In my own pencil, in 19-year-old handwriting that I almost didn't recognize, Owen Whitaker. Whitaker and Associates, Waterloo. Owen Whitaker had walked into our kitchen 6 weeks earlier and asked for coffee black. Whitaker and Associates was in a brick building on East 4th Street in Waterloo, between a podiatrist and a small CPA firm that, in another life, I might have applied to. The receptionist was a woman in her 60s with a paperback novel face down on her desk. I told her I was Wanda Caudle. She picked up the phone and said only, "She's here." She had been expecting me. Owen came out of his office. He didn't say hello. He held the door open and said, "Take your time." The office was small. Tweed coat clean. 2 framed pheasant prints on the wall. A bookshelf of Iowa real estate law treatises that had not been pulled down in years. A desk with very little on it. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He sat across from me. He folded his hands on the desk. He said, "Your grandfather told me you would come." I said, "He told me to come?" He said, "Yes. He hoped you would." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. It made the sound that drawers make when they haven't been opened in a long time. He lifted out a manila folder. It was thick. He set it between us. He did not push it toward me. He waited. I opened it. The first page was a trust document. The Bernard L. Caudill Irrevocable Trust, dated June 4, 2013. I scanned the language the way I scan tax documents. I went straight to the schedules. Schedule A, Property held in trust, 320 acres, legal description as attached, parcel ID and section township range filed Black Hawk County, free and clear of encumbrance, conveyed in fee simple to the trust this 4th day of June, 2013. I went to the schedule of beneficiaries. Schedule B, one name, one line, Wanda Marie Caudill, granddaughter, sole and exclusive beneficiary upon the death of the grantor. My grandfather had owned the land outright. My grandfather had put it in a trust. My grandfather had named me as the only person entitled to receive it. For 12 years, my parents had been running a farm that did not legally belong to them. They had been telling me to stop acting entitled on land where I was the only one with a legal entitlement. I looked up. Owen was watching me. He said, "There's more. He wanted you to see the rest." He took a small disc out of an envelope clipped to the back of the folder. He slotted it into a DVD drive on his desktop. He turned the monitor toward me. The video opened on the kitchen table. Our kitchen table. Same Formica counter. Same chipped corner where Travis set down the hot skillet. The blue salt cellar in its 1986 position. The light coming through the east window in the way summer light came through the east window. My grandfather sitting in his chair in a plaid flannel shirt I remembered, holding the coffee mug with the cardinal on it. The mug that is still today in the cupboard above the dishwasher in that kitchen. He looked into the camera and he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Owen, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone and they've started." He shifted in his chair. "You don't have to stop them. I want you to be there. I want you to be witness to what they choose. They have to do this themselves. They have to choose it. I won't take that away from them by stepping in too early." He took a sip of coffee. He set the mug down. "My daughter has been signing my name on Christmas cards since she was 12 years old. I have known this her whole life. I am not asking you to surprise her with it. I am asking you to give her enough rope. She'll pick it up. She always does." He looked off camera. He looked back. "My grandson is a soft boy who will do whatever the loudest person in the room tells him to do. He'll be there too. He'll be there because Diane will need a witness. He won't understand what he's agreeing to. He never does." A pause. "My granddaughter is a careful person. She'll figure it out before you tell her. When she comes to you, and she will come, you let her see this. You don't summarize it for her. You let her hear my voice, and then you let her decide what she wants done." He picked up the mug again. He looked back at the camera. "Owen, if they try to sell it, I want you there, not to stop them, to let them stop themselves." The video ended. I sat in Owen's office for a long time without saying anything. He didn't fill the silence. He understood it. My grandfather had not made the video for me. He had made it for Owen. He had not addressed me once. He had spoken about me in the third person. My granddaughter is a careful person. He had not been protecting me. He had been trusting me. He had foreseen, 12 years ago, that his own children would try to do what they were now doing. He had built the mechanism that would let them choose it. He had made me the witness, not the rescued. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Owen. I had never been the protagonist of this story. I had been the verdict. Owen gave me a copy of the proposed bill of sale before I left his office. 5 pages, prepared by a paralegal he'd hired, the way a real buyer would prepare such a document. The price was set at $2,400,000, slightly below market, chosen to be plausible enough that my parents would not question it. The signature lines were on page 5. 2 signature lines. One for the seller. One for the seller's authorizing party. My father had signed his name in blue ballpoint on the seller's line, Walter R. Caudill. The authorizing party line, the line designated for the deceased grantor of the trust whose authorization my parents could not actually obtain, was signed Bernard L. Caudill in the same blue ballpoint. I stared at the signature for a long time. I have my grandfather's signature on 22 years of birthday cards, 45 years of operating account checks, the mortgage papers from when he bought the South 40 in 1971. I know the way he made his B's, small loop at the top, square base. I know the way he made his L's, straight line, no flourish. I know the way he wrote his name. I have spent my adult life looking at the signatures of farmers and old men, and I know what 80-year-old farmer cursive looks like. The signature on the bill of sale was not his. I drove home that night. I went into the closet again. I dug into the bottom box. I pulled out a stack of Christmas cards from the early 2000s. The cards I had kept because, at the time, I'd thought my mother's effort to write to me, her annual hand-lettered Christmas note, meant something. I lined them up on the coffee table. Merry Christmas, Wanda. We love you. Mom and Dad, year after year. 11 years of Christmas cards I'd kept in a shoebox. The Y in Wanda. The Y in Mary. The Y in Christmas. My mother makes her lowercase y with a single curling loop at the bottom of the descender. A small, deliberate spiral. Not a hook. A spiral. She has done this her whole adult life. She did it on every grade school permission slip I ever brought home. She did it on the note attached to the $22,000 check. We are so proud. I went back to the contract. The Y in Bernard L. Caudill, the Y on the last letter of Caudill, had the same single curling loop. My grandfather had never made a letter that way in his life. It had not been my father. It had been my mother. She had been the one with the steady hand. She had been the bookkeeper at the church for 20 years. She had 1,000 hours of practice forging signatures, at least the kind of practice that came from signing my father's name on hundreds of school documents, building permits, insurance forms, the small bureaucratic instances of a marriage where Walter was always at work and Diane was always at home with a pen. She had moved her hand the way her hand moved. 3 days later, I drove down to the Pheasant in Cedar Falls for a glass of wine. I sat at the bar. Travis was already there. He hadn't seen me yet. He was at a booth in the back, hunched over a phone, talking to a man I didn't recognize. I picked up a copy of the Courier from the rack and pretended to read it. I listened. Travis said, "They told me they'd cover it. Just 1 more month. They said the buyer's serious." The other man said, "I gave you till the end of October. I have given you 4 extensions. I am not patient. Do you understand?" Travis said, "Yes. Yes, I understand. End of November, I swear." The man said, "End of November is the last one. After that, I send people." He stood up. He left. Travis stayed at the booth, hands shaking, looking at his phone. I folded the paper. I walked out the side exit before he turned around. In my truck, I sat. I now knew who. I now knew why. My mother had signed my grandfather's name to bail out my brother's gambling debt. I knew exactly who had signed my grandfather's name, and I knew exactly why. The first Sunday in November of 2025 was an ordinary Sunday in every way that mattered. I drove out at 8 in the morning. The fields had been disked. The wind was coming from the northwest. I parked beside the chicken coop. I climbed the porch steps. I opened the back door without knocking. My father had already poured my coffee. The toast was cut diagonally on the blue plate. My mother was wiping the counter, even though the counter was clean. My brother was at the table in his flannel shirt, reading the Des Moines Register. The salt cellar was 3 inches to the left of where my grandmother had put it in 1986. My mother had been moving it back, the way she had been moving it back for years. I noticed. My father gestured to my chair. Sit down, Wanda. Coffee's hot. I sat. I sipped. The coffee was good. He'd always made good coffee. He let me drink for a moment. Then he reached into the manila folder on the table and slid a stack of papers across to me. He laid them between the salt cellar and my coffee cup. He said, "We've made a decision about the farm. The buyer's a good man. He's offering a fair price. We need you to sign." I picked up the top sheet. I scanned it. The numbers were arranged the way Owen's paralegal had arranged them. The signature page was on top. My father said, "Sign this. Stop acting entitled." The word entitled in his mouth was tired, the way it had been tired in his mouth my whole life. The word had become a household word, the way some families say love or please. I looked at him. He looked tired. He looked sad. He looked like a man who genuinely believed he was doing the responsible thing for his family. He looked like he had practiced this in the mirror. I looked at my brother. He was reading the paper. He didn't look up. He said, in the offhand way you'd say it about a baseball score, "You don't own anything, Wanda." He drummed his thumb on his knee. I noted the drum. He didn't notice that I noted it. He'd been drumming his thumb for 35 years and nobody had ever told him. My mother kept wiping. She had been wiping the same 6 inches of counter for the entire 2 minutes I'd been sitting at the table. The dishcloth was making the small squeaking sound dishcloths make on dry formica. She said, without turning, "We've talked it over. We think it's best for everyone. The farm is too much for your father to handle anymore. The money would help all of us. Travis has his family to think about. You have your career. It's a good outcome for everyone." She still didn't turn around. She said, "Don't make a thing of it, Wanda. You're not the only one in this family." I read the contract. I took my time. I read the recitals. I read the purchase price. I read the closing conditions. I read the schedule of representations. I read the schedule of warranties. I turned to the signature page. I read the buyer's signature line, "To be executed at closing." I read the seller's signature line, "Walter R. Caudill, signed in blue ballpoint." I read the authorizing party signature line, "Bernard L. Caudill, signed in blue ballpoint in my mother's hand, with the looping Y I had known my entire life." I set the paper down on the table. I looked at my mother. She was still wiping. Her shoulders were a little tighter than they had been a minute earlier. She knew I was looking at her. She did not turn around. I looked at my father. He was watching me. I looked at my brother. He was reading the paper. I looked at the salt cellar. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. The coffee was lukewarm now. I set the cup down. I said in a voice I am proud of, in a voice I would not have had 2 months earlier, in a voice that I think my grandfather would have recognized, "Okay." That was the only thing I said. My father's face moved a fraction of an inch. Not quite relief. Almost. My brother kept reading. My mother stopped wiping. She did not turn around. She held very still, the way prey holds still when it has stopped trusting the silence. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I picked up my keys. I walked across the kitchen, past the salt cellar, past the photograph of my grandfather, past the dog asleep on her bed under the window. I opened the back door. I walked out into the cold November morning. I climbed into my truck. I started the engine. I did not say goodbye. I backed out of the driveway. I drove down the gravel road in the direction of the highway. I did not turn on the radio. I needed to hear myself think. I drove the 23 miles to Waterloo. I drove the back roads, not the highway. I drove past my grandfather's church. I drove past the Lutheran cemetery on County Road Webthought 14. I drove past the spot on V14 where Travis had crashed my truck. I drove past it carefully and at the speed limit, the way I had been driving past it for 15 years. At the Black Hawk County Recorder's office in downtown Waterloo, I parked across the street. I sat in my truck for a minute. I looked at the building. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that they were not shaking. I noted it the way I'd note any other discrepancy. I had expected my hands to shake. I got out of the truck. I crossed the street. I climbed the 4 concrete steps to the entrance. The glass door said Black Hawk County Recorder, Marlene Pruitt, Senior Clerk. I opened the door. I stepped inside. Owen Whitaker was already at the counter. He turned. He saw me. He nodded. He said, "Take your time." The lobby of the Black Hawk County Recorder's office is the size of a small dentist's waiting room. There is a long Formica counter with 3 positions. There is a row of chairs along the wall. There is a coffee table with old issues of Iowa Farmer. There are 6 fluorescent lights, 2 of which were flickering that day. Marlene Pruitt was at the middle position, 50s, gray cardigan, reading glasses on a chain. She knew Owen. She nodded at him. She looked at me with curiosity. At the chairs sat 2 women in their 70s, a Mrs. Hinkle and her sister-in-law, I would later learn, filing a property survey for a farm in Hudson. Behind them stood a USPS mailman in a navy jacket waiting for a certified mail signature. By the door stood Deputy Holcomb, off-duty in jeans and a Carhartt vest, having stopped in to drop off paperwork for his uncle. 8 witnesses, if you counted Marlene. I counted Marlene. I crossed to the counter. Owen made room. He said quietly, "Your parents are coming. I asked Marlene to send a message that the buyer wanted to do the transfer in person today." I nodded. He said, "Do you want to wait outside?" I said, "No." We waited. My parents arrived at 1:42 in the afternoon. I know the time because Marlene's office has an old-fashioned wall clock above the counter, and I was counting the seconds. My father came in first, holding a different folder than the one he'd held at breakfast. My mother followed. My brother was not with them. My father's face changed when he saw me. He stopped just inside the door. My mother nearly walked into his back. She looked past him, saw me, and held very still. My father recovered. He moved up to the counter. He set his folder down. He smiled at Marlene the way men in Iowa smile at women in offices, tired, courteous, slightly performative. He said, "Good afternoon, ma'am. We're here to record a transfer of the family farm. This is Mr. Whitaker, the buyer. And my daughter Wanda is here to, well, she decided to come." He smiled at me. He did not say what I had decided to come for. He turned back to Marlene. He laid his hand on the folder. He said, "This is a clean sale. My father wanted this. He authorized it before he passed." Marlene took the folder. She opened it. She looked at the first page. She did not say anything. Owen reached into his briefcase. He placed his own folder on the counter. He opened it. He took out the trust document. He laid it on the counter between Marlene and my father. He said, "I would like to call your attention to this." My father glanced at it. The color left his face slowly, from the top down. First his forehead, then his cheeks, then his neck above his collar. My mother stayed still. Marlene picked up the trust document. She turned it. She read the first page. She read the schedule of beneficiaries. She read the date. She set it down on the counter and she looked at my father over her reading glasses. My father's mouth opened. He pulled himself together. He said, "That was rescinded. Dad changed his mind. There's a later document. He revoked the trust before he died." Owen said, "It's an irrevocable trust, Walter. He couldn't revoke it. By design." My father said, "He told me. He told me himself, in the hospital. He told me he wanted me to handle the place after he was gone." Owen said, "Did he?" He reached back into his briefcase. He took out his laptop. He set it on the counter. He opened it. The screen showed the kitchen at the farm and my grandfather at the table holding the cardinal mug. Owen pressed play. My grandfather's voice came out of the small speakers and filled the lobby of the Black Hawk County Recorder's office. Owen, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone and they've started. My father's hand reached for the counter. He held onto it. You don't have to stop them. I want you to be there. I want you to be witness to what they choose. They have to do this themselves. They have to choose it. Mrs. Hinkle and her sister-in-law had stopped pretending to read their property survey. The mailman had set down his clipboard. Deputy Holcomb had taken one step toward the counter and stopped there. My daughter has been signing my name on Christmas cards since she was 12 years old. I have known this her whole life. My mother's eyes closed for a second. They opened. She looked at me. She did not look at my father. My granddaughter is a careful person. She'll figure it out before you tell her. The video ended. The lobby was silent. I spoke for the first time. I spoke quietly. I spoke to my mother. I said, Mom, your Y has a loop. Grandpa's never did. I laid the contract on the counter. I pointed to the signature, Bernard L. Caudle, with the looping Y. My father looked at the signature. He looked at my mother. His face did something I had never seen it do. He said, Diane. He said her name like it was a question he had never thought to ask. My mother straightened. She did not look at him. She looked at me. Her face was very calm. She was past the place where panic operates. She had crossed into the place where the only thing left was the truth. She said, in a voice clear enough that everyone in the lobby could hear, Your grandfather always loved you more. Silence. Marlene Pruitt did not move for one full breath. Then she picked up the phone. She dialed 3 digits. She said into the receiver, This is Marlene at the recorder's office. I need a deputy. We have a forgery and possible elder fraud. The grantor of the document is deceased. Deputy Holcomb stepped to the counter. My father sat down on a chair. He had not been told to sit. He sat anyway. His knees would not hold him. My mother kept looking at me. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She had said the sentence she had been waiting her entire life to say, and she was not going to take it back. It was the only honest sentence I had ever heard her speak. If you've ever watched a parent prove with one sentence that they meant every cruel thing they ever said and chose to walk away anyway, I want to hear from you. Walking away is not abandonment. Sometimes it's the first time you ever protected yourself. The legal consequences started moving within hours. By the end of that afternoon, my parents had been read their rights at the recorder's office and asked to come to the sheriff's substation for questioning. By the end of the week, my mother had been charged with 3 counts of Iowa forgery and 1 count of uttering a forged instrument. My father had been charged with conspiracy to defraud and felony theft for the operating account withdrawals. The federal charges followed 9 days later. Mail fraud, because they had mailed copies of the bill of sale across state lines to a paralegal in Owen's office. Owen, as trustee, filed an emergency motion in probate court. The motion was granted. The farm, all 320 acres of it, was restored to the trust and remained, where my grandfather had put it in 2013, in my name. I was named acting trustee. My brother was not charged. He had not signed anything. He had not, technically, done anything. He had only watched. Caroline learned about the gambling debt the day the local courier published the story of my parents' arraignment. They are separated, last I heard. Ethan lives with her in Cedar Falls. Travis sends me text messages once a month that I do not open. 3 weeks after the morning in the recorder's office, I drove out to the farm alone. I let myself into the empty house. I sat down at the kitchen table. I took out a notebook. I drafted a trust. For Ethan Walter Caudle, age 6, sole beneficiary. To be received upon his 25th birthday, contingent on 12 documented visits to the farm between his 18th and 25th years, made of his own volition and without parental influence. To be supervised by a trustee, Owen Whitaker, who has agreed. I signed it. I sat in my grandfather's chair. I looked out the window at the November cornfield, stubble and frost, the same view he had looked